Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Strife Sanctum. My name is Citizen Strife, and this week's going to be a bit of a quick one, as we're going to delve into a franchise which I think is what I would classify cult classic. Definitely underrated, but we have to start with the first one, obviously. And this goes back all the way to the early 90s. And back then, unlike now, Square Enix was split into two companies. You had Squaresoft, which was running high with Final Fantasy. They hadn't done stuff like Secret of Mana yet, but it was in the process of making it. But they were slowly developing their brand as Final Fantasy, but it was a big deal. On the opposite end, you had Enix, which I believe had the rights to Dragon Quest at the time. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but I'm sure that was their big one. But they also had a lot of smaller scale franchises, which were still big deals at the time. And one of them was from a company known as Quintet. While I hadn't played stuff like Actraiser, this branch came off of the Ys franchise. And I've talked about Ys to death before in my Ys 8 playthrough and subsequent review of it, because Ys 8 was great. However, at the time, they had probably 3 or 4 games in the franchise at that point. They splintered off into what's known as Quintet. And these people ended up developing the Soul Blazer trilogy. Soul Blazer trilogy is loosely affiliated. The gameplay style is very similar, action RPG stuff, to Ys, to Zelda, that sort of thing. But they're not affiliated with any other franchise. They're not even affiliated with each other, so to speak. It's one of those things kind of like Zelda, where the things are interconnected, but they're not really. They're self-contained stories. And I think I appreciate when franchises don't hold to establish, like, they hold to established canon, but they're doing their own thing. In a similar way of Final Fantasy, I guess. You still have the loose affiliation game to game, but you're telling a different story. I think Persona also succeeds at doing this. Themes and events and characters sort of affiliate with each other, but you're not beholden to things like a rigid structure. But Soul Blazer was one of those games back in the SNES days I definitely remember playing a lot of. It's unfortunate that as far as access goes, of the 3 games, Terranigma is the one that we really don't have anymore. Soul Blazer you may find here and there, but Illusion of Gaia, specifically on the SNES Classic, is the one that people have access to. Which is a shame, because even though I think Illusion of Gaia is better, there is definitely something to be said for going back to where a franchise started and seeing where it goes. As far as a first attempt, Soul Blazer does a pretty decent job. Is it fantastic? No, but I still find it fairly memorable for what it tried to do. You know, in that it's a basic game for basic tastes and all that sort of thing. It does everything well. It doesn't do anything totally wrong. Speaking of basic, the plots and the characters are fairly basic, but they're done in an okay way. I think in terms of like original games, like when you get into this era, you see a lot of like iffy translation work and very blasé, I'm going to belch everything I'm going to tell you. This game kind of avoids it for the most part. I think the characters, at least as basic as they are, feel like characters. Specifically one time where the main character goes into one of the the NPC's houses, and she screams and was like, what the hell are you doing in my house? You know, so they're not trying to be wholly comedic or, off the wall and zany, but they're at least trying to make an effort in keeping the characters as they are, as you would expect in a situation like that. But as far as characters and story, you are in control of the Blazer. Think of him as a holy protector, goody two-shoes, silent protagonist type. The trick is that he is a servant of what is known as the Master, a disembodied angelic voice or godlike being that you talk to, and he helps you teleport to different areas. The Master himself is taking you from area to area to area, and he tells you that the main villain of the game is this kind of demonic being siphoning energy from this deal that he made with this King Magrid. So everything that's going wrong is this character Death Toll's fault. We don't see him until the end. We don't hear him until the end. He's just the force of nature, force of destiny kind of villain that is the ever-present threat. How he accomplished this was he made the deal. King Magrid ended up tapping this inventor, Dr. Leo, and you'll hear that name over and over and over. You won't really hear Death Toll that much again. You won't even hear King Magrid or even Queen Magrid until the final area. You'll hear a lot about Dr. Leo. He and his family, his pets, his friends, things surrounding him were caught up in this storm of events because of the deal that Death Toll made. And the key to all of the events is the Blazer has to go in and save everyone. What really makes the Soul Blazer work as its own game is the mechanics as to how you're going from level to level, but you're saving people bit by bit. They're taking things from Actraiser. I forget if Actraiser came first or came second. I would imagine Actraiser came first and they took ideas from it and got you the world-building mechanic of sorts for Soul Blazer. And it was something I hadn't really seen before. But the idea is that bit by bit, you're reclaiming the worlds, and then you're going to get these stones that give you access to Death Toll's domain, the world of evil. So as I said before, no characters, no stories gonna just bowl you over. It's just setting you in there, letting you do its thing. It's certainly in that Link to the Past kind of vibe where they give you enough to go on, but they're not gonna kill. They're not gonna kill it. That's where the gameplay comes in. And as I said with the gameplay, the biggest real thing with this is the action RPG mechanics, the world-saving mechanics. So you have your sword, you have your spells, and the cool thing is you have this right at the beginning of the game. It's not the Master helping you, but it's this separate soul that kind of floats around as an orb, and he acts as your magic conduit. So while Blazer's doing the sword swipe and doing damage that way, you have magic spells, which can range from fire to 4 beams of light in all directions. That's probably my favorite one. There's some other ones here and there. There's about 4 or 5 different spells that you get throughout the game, and you kind of mix and match those. Certain enemies have different affinities, and you can kill certain enemies until you have certain things, and you get unlocks throughout the game, special skills that allow you to get through these cool things. Because some of the enemies, like early on, you can't even kill, like these spiders in one of the dungeons. You can't really kill because they're made of hard armor, so you have to come back. So it gives you incentive to come back and do things later to get some extra stuff, like extra health and whatnot, or get an extra thing that you need. You only also get 1 herb, so you have to manage your resources. So you have to manage your health wisely. 1 healing herb is basically going to be your blue potion of sorts and full heal you. And you're going to need that for the boss fights. Not so much the journey. But each monster comes out of these gates. And the gates have anywhere from 4 monsters to about 10 or 15. Some are even like environmental hazards or gates. You don't even see coming until you see it. Like, they could be a torch for all you know, rather than just a bunch of monsters that come in. And every monster kind of ranges from super easy to just stabbing to throw them in a line and then set them on fire. So there are unique mechanics at play for certain enemies, whether they be tougher or just immune to certain types of damage. So there is some versatility in the battle system. It's not a lot, but for an action RPG, it does, again, the Zelda-y kind of thing where it gives you something to go by. When you defeat an enemy, you seal the gate that they came from, because Death Toll sending all those monsters your way. So there's like 4 or 5, maybe even 10 gates per screen. So each level is probably going to take 10, 15 minutes, give or take. And when you do that, you unlock piece by piece the towns that you're at. And the towns, in order, are the High Top Village in the mountains. You have a forested area in the valley, a mermaid village underwater, which you conveniently get a big giant bubble for when you're underneath the water. Another mountainous area, but this one in more of a snowy cape and cave. Dr. Leo's house himself in a laboratory, and then Magrid, the city and castle itself. So there's some variability, but once you get to different areas, you fight different monsters. Nothing's gonna wow you, and I think you can see kind of where I'm going with my praise here. Is everything just works to an extent, and it's gonna be hard to find negatives and nitpicks, but when you unseal stuff, everything kind of keeps going, so you kind of bounce back and forth. Either you get something from the townspeople, like an item, or you get a special item which you can use to make further progress. Because if you want, in most cases, you can just keep on going through levels all willy-nilly until you reach the end, and then unlock the teleport. The benefit, and this is where I'm going to spend a lot of the time for this foreseeable thing, is getting the items and then unlocking the teleport, because you get 3. You get the beginning teleport to get to the town, and then you get the final teleport, which gets you to near the boss room. There's a third teleport, which I think is like a midway point, say midway between most dungeons and things, or the beginning of a platform. So say the town feature and whatnot. But those teleport features at the ends of dungeons right near the bosses are huge, because these boss fights are no joke. They are absolutely relentless. I found they tend to be on the harder side, even by RPG standards. Mostly due to the fact that I know this was true mostly in Illusion of Gaia, but especially for Soul Blazer, you get stuck by an enemy, they will just wreck your shit. Probably has to do with iframes. That you can't boost yourself up to mostly an extent. They will just take out your health bar. So it is a slow going affair in how to take care of an enemy. Case in point, the first enemy is in this living painting kind of place, and he ends up becoming an enemy in a set of escalators, and he's swiping at you with these backhand swipes. If you try to stick behind him, you can only hit him from his face and his head, but if you stay too long, he's just going to swipe you. But if you stay too far in the front, he's just going to hit you with fireballs. Another one is this thing darts around the screen and does a lot of damage. I think my favorite boss fight is this floating skull that lives on this pirate ship in the third area, where it's a environmental hazard until you get to that boss, where his head's floating at the end of the ship, like the head of a ship. I keep forgetting what the name of that is, the thing on the end of a ship that points out. So he's basically that part of the ship, and you have to climb through a bunch of broken areas trying to get to that guy. and there's a lot of torches and skeletons and zombies and junk. So you're already in danger trying to get to the guy. And then you have his grabby hands and just him trying to gnaw at you. So it's not the easiest thing. And it's also, sometimes it's not easy to get to the enemies themselves. They will, I remember specifically the fourth boss, this like mermaid Triton looking guy that tries to stab you with a spear. You can't really damage him because he's kind of offbeat, and then he only shows up when he's trying to stab you with his spear, so you don't get a lot of time to mess around with it. Of course, Death Toll is going to be the hardest one. You don't have a lot of leeway, and he's just throwing laser beams and all sorts of fire and other crap at your way, and it's definitely tough. I found the boss fights to be relatively tough, especially compared to a lot of the scrub enemies. So the battle system is fine. The music, I think, is also really good. It's solid. I don't really like the main town theme. It's fine, but I think they overuse it a bit too much. Considering the game they're coming from, I see it's their first one. They don't overuse they don't like have every single theme, right? The boss theme isn't super good either. I think what really sells it though is when you're traveling in a world, you feel like you're on an adventure. Whether it's the underground castle in the beginning, climbing the volcano in the third area, like every area feels different, and it's nice. Considering how limiting it is to hear the same town theme and the same, boss theme, which aren't really the greatest, it's nice that certain areas have different types of music, and it does speak to, again, a solid set of rules and a solid foundation, because if you have a solid foundation, you can get away with being pretty basic as far as a game goes. But as far as negatives go, I would say the bosses being pretty difficult for what they're supposed to be. Yeah, I think the Illusion of Gaia bosses are a little easier to handle, just because Will in the Illusion of Gaia has a little bit more leeway in how to guard and how to avoid damage, and he usually gets a lot more room to work with. In this game, you're very limited in how often you can hit a boss because they don't expose themselves for very long. Certain ones do, like the second bosses. The second set of bosses are basically just flying around the arena trying to shoot you with projectiles, rather than, oh god, I'm stuck and I can only hit him from a certain amount of time and then run back and then avoid him, or he's only available at certain point, that sort of boss type. So the lack of iframes and the lack of hitting bosses really hurts trying to do damage to them. And of course their health bar is so great, you're at a loss sometimes, and the bosses are not to be trifled with. The town themes, as I've said, not a fan. It's just pretty basic, wind swept up town theme stuff, happy town music. It's nothing bad, it's just not memorable is the best term I would use, especially considering a lot of the fighting themes and overworld themes are at least halfway decent. The only thing I can really think is as a strange choice is the ending. And it's a minor spoiler, because, again, the story's not the most amazing thing. But this is the thing I could dig into a little bit more that I didn't like. So consider it a spoiler for a couple minutes. But I spoke about the person who the Blazer interrupts in her house. It ended up being Lisa. Dr. Leo's daughter, or granddaughter, I forget which. But she has these weird dreams, and she gives you access to the first dungeon for the first boss. As time goes by, you don't really think anything of it, but you start learning that everything that Dr. Leo is doing, like everybody you're talking to is his pet dog, pet dolphin, his doll, little people that he knows, or his daughter himself. And then later on, Dr. Leo sacrifices himself while his daughter is kidnapped. later on, once you've defeated Death Toll, you get this weird epilogue, which he's done his thing, and you don't get anything with Blazer. He's just there. I'm doing this because my master said so. He doesn't have agency. He is that character I always call Dorkface. For those who are new, Dorkface is my term for silent protagonists, because they have no agency on their own, and you have to be told via the game of their motivations because they themselves have none. So I always call them dork faces. So Blazer doesn't have motivation on his own. But he saves Lisa at the cost of Dr. Leo's life because of the sacrifice. Death Toll dies. Later on, we get this whole weird thing where Blazer uses the Dream Rod on Lisa. The Dream Rod allows you to enter dreams, and Lisa starts talking about how she's all alone and whatever. And I guess it spoke to him. And a little while later, the Master talks to Blazer and says, if you are willing to go back to see Lisa, you can live with her again, but you won't have any memory of being with her. So the game spends an inordinate amount of time on a character which really didn't get a lot of screen time, at most 3 to 5 minutes. And they end up together, but in so doing, you're wondering why. There's no real chemistry between the characters. It's not even the Link Zelda thing or the Mario Peach thing where they're specifically trying to save that person. Blazer ended up saving Lisa as a byproduct of his journey. So it feels like Lisa is a bit of a token victory, that trophy wife. I mean, they don't end up, they sort of come together in the end. I think they did it solely because, oh, hey, this is a good ending and everybody's happy and whatever. But I think they overestimated how important Lisa was to the plot. And just because we're controlling the Soul Blazer, what it means to sacrifice our heavenly being to, throw it all away. I think later games, if you were to do this, it would have been a more effective storytelling method. I'm nitpicking, but I hope you can see why I'm sitting there thinking this is a bit of a tacked on mechanic just because it needs to be there. That's my interpretation of it. It needed to be there, and they gave you the flimsiest of motivations to get to that point. Because it's not like Lisa was traveling with you. It's not like Lisa was... she was given 1 or 2 scenes, and they didn't even, build it through the game. They gave you the first bit of the game, and then all the way at level 6, they said, oh, you care about Lisa now. Go do the thing right near the end. That seems a bit awkward to me. Again, if I had to find an issue with this game, that would be it. But as far as good things in this game, the music and environments are very colorful for early 90s video games. I hate using the Zelda term again, but how do I describe it? It is a Zelda game, the world building mechanic, the bit by bit restoration of different areas is pretty cool. You get to see these sprawling landscapes suddenly filled with houses and plants and goats and trees and cave beings and other machinations. It's pretty neat. So you get your 2 or 3 dungeons, and then you slowly start building the overworld around it, and then you go to the next area. It's only a game that spends about 6 hours, so it doesn't overstay its welcome. And it's a gameplay loop that I think anybody can understand. You got a sword, you got some spells, you fight a dude. You got some swords, you got some spells, you build a place. It's very cathartic in a simple way. And of course, I do think Illusion of Gaia and later on Terranigma will do a lot more. In Terranigma's case, a hell of a lot more, to be honest. But even the work they do character-wise in Illusion of Gaia had to start somewhere. So if nothing else, consider it a recommendation to like YouTube Soul Blazer, or even if you have a copy of it way back when, because I think that's the only way to get access to it. No, I'm not suggesting piracy. No, I'm not. Anyway, but if you're not going to pirate it, or if you do have access to, say, an old school version of it, I enjoyed it. I definitely enjoyed Soul Blazer. I every so often, it's one of those games that I come back to and I think, all right, it doesn't do anything super well, but it doesn't do anything wrong. And sometimes you need games like that to remind you that it's a distraction. It's a good enough game to get you through 5 hours, and it's got some difficulty here and there, but it's not going to ruin your day either. So I think it's manageable, especially for people who are good at these sorts of games. I'm technically not usually, but I enjoyed it. But that'll do it for me today. And next time, we're going to be digging into our October schedule. We'll be digging into The Rising of Shield Hero Season 2. And I've said before, not really looking forward to it. And, I've had to unfortunately tell my friends who are looking forward to watching the second season, no. No. But I'll dig into why as to next week. After that is probably the biggest one for a while, Kingdom Hearts. Said before, I'm going to be very charitable to Kingdom Hearts. I'm not going to harp on it. I'm not going to destroy it yet. When we get to Kingdom Hearts 2, or if I ever get to Kingdom Hearts 3, I will destroy it then. But for right now, I will try. And it's not even that I hate Kingdom Hearts and whatever. And I'll go over it when we get there, but that'll be early October. After that, we do our Halloween schedule. So we'll start with Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate. We'll dig into Silent Hill 2, which should be really weird to re-experience. Haven't played that in years. And then Ghost Stories, the dub version. The notorious dub of Ghost Stories. Oh, fucking fantastic. The glory of it. But that'll do it for me. As far as when we get to November, I'm torn between the Somnium Files 1, which I'm playing right now on Twitch. I'm thinking of doing Star Ocean 3. There's Phoenix Wright 2, and God knows how many other ones. There's like 3 or 4 different options I have in my head to do next, because we are going to start dabbling back into franchises I've already covered on this channel. But I haven't decided. I think I'm going to go Phoenix Wright and Justice for All. But don't quote me on it. That one I'm going to wait, because we still have October to get through. But that should do it for me this week, and I'll see you guys next time. Citizen Strife, signing off.